Hey, friends and listeners of the Switch for Good podcast. Yep, that's you. I have some really exciting news. Dotsie and I have started a Switch for Good podcast Facebook group. We created it so we can build a community of fans that will help us improve the show and deliver on the topics that you want to learn more about. So we want to hear what your favorite content is, what you want more of, and what you want less of. And if you like the length of the show, Dotsie and I are always talking about the length of the show, right, Dotsie?
Yes.
We want to tailor our show around the needs and desires of our incredible listeners, almost 500,000 of you. And it's really simple to join. Just go to our Switch for Good Facebook page. That's Switch, the number 4, and then Good. And then click on groups. And there we are, the Switch for Good podcast chat. You can post directly in the group, share ideas, talk to other listeners, and connect with like-minded folks. So go, run, join our Facebook group and tell us what you want.
I have a question for all of you listening. Do you fall asleep fast or do you lie awake for hours? Is bedtime your bliss time or prime time to worry? Even if you don't struggle with chronic insomnia, we all know what it's like to just toss and turn at night. Dr. Nicole Moshfegh, or Dr. M, is here to help. She's a clinical psychologist who literally wrote the book on sleep, the book of sleep, 75 ways to relieve insomnia, offers evidence-based techniques to fall asleep, stay asleep, and wake up rested. I like that. And as our longtime listeners know, we love information that isn't just anecdotal. We love the good stories, but we really sink into evidence-based, and that's Dr. M. Dr. M also works as the attending psychologist at the David Geffen School of Medicine and Department of Medicine at UCLA, where she consults with med students and conducts research to analyze physicians' well-being. Want to talk about that for sure. Her other specialties include, we keep going, wow. They include treating depression, anxiety, and also burnout. Consider this your complimentary therapy session courtesy of Switch for Good. Welcome, Dr. M.
Well, thank you. I'm very excited to be here.
Oh my goodness. Well, as we can tell from the intro, Alexandra and I have quite a bit to traverse with you, and we're looking forward to learning. But let's just start in with the thought that seeing a therapist obviously has become more and more accepted. I've been in therapy for forever, since I can remember, really since my days where I almost lost my life to anorexia. And so it's certainly more and more accepted. But I grew up in the South, and I grew up with parents and grandparents that if you saw a therapist or you were in any kind of therapy, something was wrong with you, quote for those, in air quotes for those that are listening. Something was really wrong with you, and you didn't really, it didn't feel strong to admit that you might need some help, that you might need to seek some help. So what prompted you to become a psychologist, and how have you noticed over your time in this field the perception of therapy change in society?
That's a really great question. Well, for me, I kind of was one of the rare people that always knew that this is what I wanted to do. I think it just started early on in life, where I was kind of the go-to person for a lot of my friends and family in terms of helping them cope with certain things or just be a listening ear. And for me, I derived a lot of satisfaction from that, and it gave me a sense of purpose and worth. And I found the whole field of psychology just so fascinating. And so I started on this journey very early on. And in terms of perceptions regarding therapy, I think I've noticed that in the last 10 years in particular, people have grown a lot more comfortable with seeking out services. Not only just, I would say in the beginning of my career, it was more so if you had more of a severe issue, people would think that was a time to reach out for help. But now I'm more so seeing that people just want to go for overall growth and insight and understanding themselves a bit better. And that's really refreshing to see that.
I too also spent many years in therapy, and I'm very grateful to your profession. How did you come from psychologist to writing a book on sleep?
Yeah, so I had noticed pretty early on in my training that many people that I worked with, there seemed to be a common theme in terms of what they were struggling with, where sleep seemed to be actually a very major issue for a lot of people. And for whatever reason, the field of sleep isn't addressed in a lot of depth in psychology or actually in medicine as a whole. And so I saw this huge gap in terms of knowledge and meeting the need. And once I started doing more research into it, I found that actually lack of sleep can contribute to a lot of symptoms that people experience in terms of depression, suicidal thoughts, anxiety. And so for me, it was like, well, why are we not talking about this more, especially if this might be the key in terms of helping people get even better and experience more relief from their symptoms. And so as a result of that, I did a lot of my training in health psychology at UCLA and serious mental illness. And so I was able to get more training in the field of sleep medicine, and just started really writing about it on my website. And then someone reached out to me, and I decided, why not put more of that information out there?
Yeah, certainly sleep has come into its own in the last decade, where people are paying more attention to it, because it used to be in the 90s, definitely, and maybe in the early 2000s, people would boast about how little sleep they were getting and how busy they are. And, I'll sleep when I'm dead. And it was looked down upon, just like Dotsie was saying, that people look down on you if you go to therapy. People look down on you if you needed a lot of sleep. Well, one of the people that I admire most in the world is my co-host, Dotsie Bausch, and she needs 8 to 9 hours for sure. Right, Dotsie?
Yeah, I assume I need it because that's what I sleep. So I sleep every night for the most part.
So tell us a little bit about why is it important to sleep? I used to actually, Ian was really happy, my husband, that we were talking about this today, because he really likes sleep and I don't really like sleep. I sort of like, oh God, I got to go to sleep. I'm not, and he used to feel like I didn't have respect for sleep, which he was right. And then I read 2 books on sleep, and we'll be reading a third one, yours, Dr. M. And I really understood how important it is. But I think a lot of people don't understand. They just think it's a time when you're zonked out, but it's actually a time of a lot of work going on in the body to make us more effective during the day.
Absolutely, absolutely. So sleep impacts many aspects of our life. So from our physical health, our immune functioning, to our mood, our ability to regulate our emotions, our ability to be present with another person and be empathic. There are studies that show that those that are lacking sleep actually have a more difficult time being able to do that. It affects our performance. So even in sports, we know that those who are low on sleep, it can affect how they then perform in an activity. It can even affect our leadership abilities as well. Of course, that kind of relates more so towards the ability to kind of be empathic towards other people and listen. And it affects our memory and concentration in particular. So sleep is a time where we're consolidating a lot of our memory. And so it's very crucial, especially for those who are in school and trying to learn, to get the sleep that they need. Otherwise, that's going to impact academic functioning as well. And of course, then later on, when you're working, it's going to probably slow you down a lot if you're not getting sleep either.
Most, not all, of course, but most have a pretty good ability to sleep when they're younger, but as you grow, as you age, I don't know if it has to do with just the pressure and the stress in life, or if it literally has something to do with aging itself. But I think every single morning of at least the last 10 years, my husband and I ask each other, how is your sleep? How is your sleep? Because he is not a great sleeper, is a pretty much a 7-hour nighter, would like to be a niner, like I am. But it's always the question. And then we'll kind of go through, were you waking up multiple times? Did you stay up for one of those times for, an hour or two thinking about this? What were you overthinking? I mean, we talk about it every single morning. And I'm sure that there are, a number of possibilities of what's causing it. But have you found in your work some main causes of insomnia, and can people really overcome it without drugs?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, it's better to try to overcome it without medication first than going the medication route. And we know this has been replicated with thousands of studies at this point. And so in terms of what causes insomnia, there can be, potentially any trigger, any instigating factor that might cause you to initially develop some insomnia symptoms. So some kind of life event, some kind of stressor, whether good or bad, we all will experience some sleep disturbance as a result of that. But the only reason why insomnia symptoms or sleep problems continue to persist is actually because of habits that we start to develop initially in response to the insomnia. And so,
like what would be some of those?
So some of the habits would be, allowing yourself to sleep in because you had a poor night of sleep the night before. And so that's going to throw off your circadian rhythm, your clock, or allowing yourself to compensate for a poor night of sleep by napping during the day. Or staying in bed even though you haven't fallen asleep for a long period of time, and making yourself try to fall asleep, which causes more frustration and anxiety. The more pressure you put on sleep, the less likely it is that you will sleep. So all of these things, they tend to add up. And it's understandable that you would try to turn to those things to help. It might bring some immediate relief, but in the long run, it's what really perpetuates the problem. And so this is why the main treatment for addressing insomnia symptoms is what's called cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, where we really look at what are the behaviors that are perpetuating the problem. And, because those are the things, most of those things we can control, now let's try to shift those so that we can lessen the intensity of the symptoms.
Okay.
So I'm hearing that you're saying that napping might not be good because you're tired because you didn't get a good night's sleep, and trying to sleep longer in past when you normally wake up is not a good idea. What are some things that you can do if you experience insomnia?
Can we break it down to types of insomnia? So what you might do if you are waking up in the middle of the night and you are just 2 hours, you just cannot get your brain to stop. Or intermittent, that would be the next one to because I'm wondering if maybe the solutions could possibly be different for the different types of insomnia people experience.
And some people can't get to sleep, but once they get to sleep, they're fine. So there are quite a few. You're right, Dotsie.
Yeah, that's a really good point. So, it always starts with, actually, whenever I work with people, I want to, get a better sense of what's happening for them. And so I ask them to keep a sleep diary for at least a week, where you're just writing down notes about what happened the night before. So without being, too anxious about it and checking the clock, you don't need to be exact, but you're trying to start to track your patterns and see what's actually happening. So first figuring out, is it primarily an issue falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking up too early, or a combination of all three? And seeing how long are you spending in bed overall, and what percentage of the time that you're spending in bed are you actually asleep? And that tells us a little bit more information about what's called your sleep quality or your sleep efficiency. And that can then help us to determine what you can do next. So with the issue with falling asleep, sometimes this gets a little bit tricky because there are certain people who actually have what's called a circadian rhythm disorder versus insomnia. And so that's why keeping track of your sleep using the sleep diary is also really important, because we want to try to figure out, first, is this actually your biology that's telling you that you're more of a night owl, you more have that circadian tendency, and that's why you can't fall asleep until the late hours? Or is it because of the behaviors that I was talking about before? And so it will depend based on, you know, what we find really is the root of the problem. But if it's truly insomnia, and some people can have both, but if it is the first one with insomnia, what we want to do first off for that issue is, if you are not sleepy yet, let's say the person tries to go to sleep at 10, but they're not sleepy at all, they're not noticing any signs that they're about to fall asleep, then don't get into bed. Just wait until you actually are sleepy, because your body is going to tell you when it's ready for sleep. There's not much we can do to force that at that point. So it's better, like I was saying before, don't keep trying if you already notice, you know, it's just not there yet. So that would be one solution for the person who's having trouble falling asleep. I know that sometimes it sounds like, well, I want to be asleep earlier, and you know, that's going to make it so that I have this amount of hours versus that amount of hours. But I try to tell people quality is actually much more important than quantity of sleep. So we often hear a lot about this, everyone needs 8 hours of sleep, and that's a total myth. That's a lie. So sleep needs actually vary from person to person, and one person could need as little as 6, and someone could need closer to 9 hours of sleep. But what's much more important than quantity is the quality. And that's because of something called our sleep architecture, which is what happens while we're asleep. And if we're having too much disruption while we're asleep during our sleep period, that messes with our sleep architecture, and we're not able to get as much deep sleep. And that's the sleep that leads us to feel refreshed and restorative during the day. It restores us. And so this is why, you know, I talk to people about, okay, well, maybe you're going to get a few less hours if you wait until you're actually sleepy, but the quality of your sleep will actually improve. And that's what's going to help you to feel better during the day. And this is not going to be forever. You know, it's something, if you can think about it as a temporary solution, or you know, we're temporarily going to be working on these strategies, but in the long run, it's really going to pay off. You're not going to have to do it forever, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. I was thinking about when you were talking about people that just are not tired at 10, right? Maybe they're tired at 11 or 11:30, but they have themselves on a regimen or a schedule or you know, feel like, well, but I have to get up at 5 because I got to do my workout. And then it begs the question, maybe that's not their most efficient. It sounds like they're a little bit more of a night owl if they don't get tired till 11, 11:30. Maybe the morning is not their most efficient time to work out. So thinking about switching that around and not being so militant with the 5 a.m. because that's probably why they're trying to go to bed at 10, because they want, you know, at least 7 hours.
Right. That's a really great point. So it is better if you can to just go with your natural biology. So if you are naturally more of a night owl, and your schedule permits you to keep that type of lifestyle, then if you can do it, then do it. It's going to be better for you in the long run. For some people, it's just not possible. And so, you know, when that's the case, there are different types of interventions that we have to use to help them to shift possibly to an earlier schedule, or maybe they have to shift later. It depends on the person. And so in that instance, that's something different than insomnia. The type of treatment for that, you know, we actually do have to use melatonin, but it needs to be the right dose, and it needs to be the right timing. And that's something that you would have to see a sleep medicine physician or a behavioral sleep medicine provider about in order to get the right program going for you. But if you're in a situation, again, where you can go with your natural biology, then yes, that would be a really good idea to do so.
Okay.
You mentioned melatonin. Tell us about that and the other sleep aids, and what are the advantages and disadvantages of them? The over-the-counter ones, the prescription ones, and things like the melatonin, which is considered natural. And
right. Yes. So melatonin is one that's very commonly and widely used. It's available pretty much everywhere now. But the thing is, people don't actually, I think, understand fully what the real use is for melatonin. And actually, it's only supposed to be used for what I was just saying before, for people who have more of the circadian rhythm problem, where their natural biology is not matching up with whatever schedule they have to keep, or they're doing shift work where maybe they have to work a night shift, or they're having to rapidly change their shifts frequently. That's the only time where we're really supposed to use melatonin. And the reason for that is because melatonin is the hormone that's naturally released in our bodies at a certain time based on our biology and our circadian rhythm. And so once it is already naturally released in our body, if we take the melatonin supplement after that time, it's not going to do anything. It's just going to flush it out with the rest of the melatonin that's already been released. So it's difficult, because we don't know the exact timing of when it would be released for the person. That's why it's, you have to be really careful with the timing of it. And it's something that you would need to talk to a physician or a behavioral sleep medicine provider in more detail about. So people think it's something that you can just take and it's going to help you, but you have to use it in the right way. And so for issues like insomnia, we're not really supposed to use melatonin because, again, it might help you to release, if you take it at the right time, it might help your body to release melatonin a little bit earlier to shift you to an earlier time zone, but it's not going to work on the other thing that controls our sleep, which is called our sleep drive. And so if we don't have enough sleep drive built up at that point, meaning we haven't been awake for long enough, even if our body has already released the melatonin, we're not going to fall and stay asleep. So we need both of those things in order to fall and stay asleep. And so again, it's about figuring out like what actually is the issue. And if it's insomnia, melatonin is probably not going to be the thing that helps you.
Can you affect or change your sleep drive? Or is that something that's sort of set in?
Yes, absolutely. So you can, and this is a big principle of what CBTI is based on. So a lot of what we do for people who have insomnia is we try to see first, how much sleep are they actually naturally able to produce. So maybe they're only able to produce 6 hours at any given point of time. They want to get a little bit more ideally, but they're only able to produce 6 hours. But they're spending, 8 or 9 hours in bed because it takes them an hour to fall asleep, and then they wake up for an hour in the middle of the night, they wake up before their alarm goes off, all of those things. And so what we want to do is have them spend less time in bed actually, so that they're building up their sleep drive. So if they match the amount of hours that they're spending in bed to the amount of hours they're actually able to produce sleep, it's going to increase your sleep drive significantly. And ideally you would be, active as much as possible, going about your normal day in order to build up that sleep drive. And so that by the time then the next night rolls around, you've built up more of the sleep drive and you're able to hopefully fall asleep and stay asleep for a solid period or for a longer amount of time.
Okay.
I read once, and I thought it was very interesting, that we modern humans have sort of screwed up our sleep drive and our circadian rhythms because we stay inside during the day when it's sunny, and we turn on the lights at night when we normally would be dark and we'd be going to bed. Did people before, like Neanderthals and cavemen, did they wake up at dawn and go to sleep when it turned dark. So that would be a 12-hour period for a lot of places. Have we changed our sleep so differently? And then one gentleman once told me, no, people actually, they went to bed when it got dark, but then they would wake up and stay up for several hours and then go back to bed. Explain to us how people used to sleep before we had all this artificialness in our life.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, cavemen, they've actually tried to do studies as well, where they put people in like a dark cave essentially for a week at a time, and to see if they could replicate what happened. And you're right about that, because they're not getting as many light cues, and because you're in darkness for longer amounts of time, people are typically then not actually having what we call this monophasic sleep, which is what we're used to more so in Western society in the US, where we're asleep for a solid chunk of 8 hours or so. They would sleep in kind of more of these polyphasic terms where, they would sleep for a couple hours, then maybe be awake and then fall asleep again. So our circadian rhythm does largely depend on how much light we're receiving and the timing of the light. And so that significantly does change the way that we sleep. And so that's why things have shifted massively over the years. And it's not just light, it's also, things like how our society is set up and how your schedule is set up. All of these things kind of give our rhythm an anchor. And so, yes, you were right to your point that you were saying before, where because we're often spending a lot more time indoors, we're not getting a lot of light during the day, we're getting more light at nighttime rather. That can then delay our sleep schedule as well. And so we want to try to keep things as regular as possible in order to get the best sleep that we can.
Okay. Are there aspects to how food is affecting our kind of mental state, or maybe even our emotional state when we're trying to fall asleep? Like in studies, or you in your practice, have you seen any patterns in relation to like how much we eat or when we eat, how many hours before bed, what we eat? Do certain foods inhibit good, deep, restful sleep?
That's a really good question. So I think the research on nutrition and sleep is a little bit newer, and so we don't know as much, but there are some things that we do know for sure. And that's if you have fatty, greasy, sugary types of foods or fried foods, things like that, the 3 to 4 hours before bed, that's going to usually cause a lot of gastrointestinal distress, and that can then disrupt your sleep. Mm-hmm. And so we do want to make sure we're being pretty mindful of what we're consuming the few hours before bed. And we want to try to have some kind of balance of being not too hungry and not too full. Because if we're hungry, that can also wake us up in the middle of the night. And so again, while that in and of itself usually isn't going to be the thing that causes long-term insomnia to persist, it's part of the habits where, if you're having like a giant bowl of ice cream or something like that right before you go to bed, and you notice, and you might also be lactose intolerant, which I think most people are. I know that's something that you talk about in your podcast a lot. So that can then cause you to have some disruption in your sleep in the middle of the night. So it's important to be aware of that as well.
Yeah, I had experienced a lot of the hunger in the middle of the night when I was training really hard for all those years. And I would just get super annoyed because it was, would keep you up. And so I'm down in the kitchen, but I would try to keep all the lights off so I didn't wake myself up too much, although eating pretty much totally wakes you up. And I would just be down there with crackers and almond butter, because the nut butters were the quickest, most caloric way to get it in. So I didn't have to eat for 20 minutes. So it was just like spoonfuls of almond butter, and try to go back. But I did learn, I'd always heard, don't eat super close to bedtime. A couple, like 2, 3, even 4 hours is better. So I tried to do that for a bit, thinking that was healthier, but realized that just put me in I'm waking up in the middle of the night. So then now I don't eat right before bed, really, because I'm not that hungry. But training, it's like, I think people need to really pay attention to their lifestyles. And I would eat right up against going to sleep back in the day, so that I wouldn't wake up hungry. So being flexible, it seems like, we get such these ideas that I don't know if they're true or not in our heads, that we just hear from wherever, that this is not healthy and this is, but just paying attention to your own rhythm is such a key, I think, to good deep sleep, or at least good efficient sleep, maybe I should say.
Yes, absolutely. Yes.
If I drink too much before, I don't know when I have to stop drinking, because I like to drink a lot of water.
I was going to say, she's water. She's not drinking. It sound like you're like taking bourbon before bed.
Oh yeah, no, it's water. But I was going to, yeah. So anyway, if I drink, I have to stop. I should stop water around 7 p.m., 3 or 4 hours before I go to bed. So 6, 7 p.m. Otherwise, I'll be getting up in the night, which I never did as a kid. As a kid, I slept right through the night all the time, woke up, because I understand that the need to pee gets sort of suppressed or something while we sleep. Is that right, Nicole?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And so, but now forget it. I think that thing doesn't work anymore, because I can wake up 3 or 4 times in a night to pee if I've been drinking a lot of water.
Yeah, that's an excellent point as well. We need to be mindful of our hydration and how much liquid we're consuming before bed. And so I do recommend that people, 3 hours before bed, probably stop consuming any fluids if you can. I mean, if you really are thirsty, try to maybe have a sip, but try to get most of your fluid and water intake in earlier in the day, and then cut it off closer to bedtime, because it is going to cause you to wake up and have to urinate, and then that's going to disrupt your sleep.
Mm-hmm. What about the other liquids, alcohol and coffee?
Yes, good question. So I think most people know that caffeine disrupts our sleep, but people probably aren't aware of how long of a half-life caffeine can have. And so it's something that, if you have your last coffee at noon, it can still be in your system by 10 or 11 o'clock if you're trying to go to sleep. So we do really want to, I always tell everyone, try to just have it in the morning. By lunchtime, if you can stop having any caffeine, that would be a really good idea. And there are a lot of things that have caffeine in it that we might not be aware of, like chocolate and things like that. And with alcohol in particular, so alcohol is a sedative, and it is going to initially maybe sedate you a bit, and that might help you to fall asleep. But the problem is it's then going to affect your sleep architecture. So those sleep stages I was referring to earlier, and it's going to affect your ability to get into more of the deep restorative sleep stages. And as a result of that, you're going to wake up feeling not as refreshed. And so in general, I do recommend, especially if you're having sleep problems, try to avoid any alcohol at least 3 to 4 hours before bed.
So many people experience the lovely combination of anxiety and insomnia. I know that they probably encourage each other, the anxiety of for the insomnia to the insomnia for sure. But it feels like lying awake in bed is really kind of that prime worry time about things that you don't have any control over, right? That anxious mind. How can a person manage these co-occurring situations of anxiety really producing insomnia, and then the lack of sleep produces more anxiety?
Right. Yeah, it becomes this never-ending cycle for a lot of people, and it becomes very challenging. So one of the biggest things I do for people when they're having anxiety is first work on building more awareness of their thoughts, because your thoughts can greatly contribute to how you're feeling and then what you do, your behavior. And while we can't really control our emotions, we can control our thoughts and we can control our behaviors. And so if we can develop more awareness of, what are the thoughts that are coming through your mind, especially during the day that you might not be fully aware of, that are contributing to some of the anxiety that you're experiencing, we can then work on trying to change some of those thought patterns as well, because we can sometimes get into unhealthy thinking traps around things where we might even overemphasize the importance of sleep. And as a result of that, again, that puts more anxiety and pressure on sleep and then prevents us from being able to fall asleep. And so we want to try to balance things out as much as possible, where, yes, sleep is important, but it's not the only thing that's important. The rest of your day and what you do during the day is also important. Spending time with family and friends and keeping up with commitments and, thinking about what are the things that are important to you, what do you value, and trying to act in line with those things rather than focusing all of your time and energy on sleep. And so that practice can really help us to decrease the pressure again on our sleep to hopefully get more sleep at night. And of course, other things like meditation, different relaxation strategies, we really want to try to incorporate that as much as possible during the day, because pretty much everything we do during the day is going to be what affects us at night and how we're able to sleep. So really focusing on the daytime and what you're doing is actually going to help you more at night.
How does what happens the 3 hours before 4 hours you go to bed? So exercise and screens. Dotsie already brought up food, and we talked about alcohol. But how would what can we do? Do those red glasses help to mitigate the blue light that comes from the TV or the phones or the pads or the Macs?
Yeah, that's a really great question as well. So in terms of I think you were referring to the blue light blocking glasses. There's some mixed research on this. So, a lot of the research early on was done in teens, and we know that for teens, it really does impact their circadian rhythm, and teens already at that phase, they are more night owl oriented naturally. So our circadian tendency changes as we age. So, we start off really early oriented, then by teenage years and early adulthood, we're much more night owls. And then as we age, we become more of the early birds. And so particularly for that age group, it really is important to limit exposure to blue light as much as possible. Blue light is a similar spectrum that we receive from the sun. And as I was mentioning before, the sun really is one of those things that sets our clock. And so we want to try to limit blue light as much as possible 3 to 4 hours before bed, especially if you're a night owl and you're already noticing it's harder for you to get to bed earlier. If you can try to limit exposure to screens, it would be very helpful. For older adults, it's again, research is a little mixed on that. It might not impact them as much, but in general, screen time can be pretty stimulating for a lot of people. And so that then can become more of the issue where, if you're watching the news or you're binge watching some type of show, like a murder show or something like that, that's going to get your brain going a little bit too much. And it might even cause some anxiety. It might kick in your fight or flight system, and you're just not going to be in the proper zone you need to be in order to fall asleep. And so I do often recommend, at the very least, trying to limit, laptop, tablet, phone, or wear the blue light blocking glasses if you would like, or put the night shift mode on your devices. The TV is not as bad as the laptop, phone, and other devices because we sit further away from it, so we're not getting typically as much light.
How would a person find their sort of sleep sweet spot, if you will? Because it sounds like it's, really it's, very specific to each individual, how they're sleeping, how much they're sleeping, how much they need to sleep, their patterns and their anxiety and their stress and everything. Everyone's really different. Are there any kind of hot tips in terms of maybe even apps that are helpful, if you not do too much of the blue light? Like I love the app Insight Timer, right? It's a meditation app. So you just have to look at it for a quick second. You go and you pick the meditation you want. It's so great because you can choose 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, and obviously relaxation, kind of sleep. And then you just put the phone away. And I always, usually almost always fall asleep while it's happening, and will find myself in, it takes hours before I even get up to pee, which is usually happens 2 or 3 hours after I go to sleep. But when I use that, I find that I'm really in deep sleep, and it's still 4 a.m. or something. So kind of tips like that for people that don't have direct access to you as an individual doctor in their lives, that you can say, you could suggest for people to try.
Yeah, I love the Insight Timer app as well. So that is definitely one, especially, if you're noticing you're anxious, using some kind of meditation or relaxation, even the hour before bed to help you unwind can be helpful. Another app that I actually use a lot with people is called CBTI Coach. And it's a free app that was developed by the VA, the Veterans Administration, because a lot of vets do have insomnia as a result of, PTSD. And so you can actually use that to help you to track your sleep. A lot of people I know are using those fitness trackers and Fitbits, Apple Watches, and things like that. Those tend to overestimate how much you're sleeping because they're only tracking movement. And the part about, I know a lot of them say that they can track how much deep sleep and light sleep you're getting. That's kind of not very accurate. So I would throw out that information, and probably better to just use the app that I'm talking about if you really want to track your sleep. And it allows you to, set a reminder every morning to just ask some questions about your sleep so you can get a better sense of what's actually happening. And what's really great about that app is that it also has a lot of information in it as well to provide you education on sleep and what controls our sleep and things like that. In terms of other resources, there, I think sleep.org by the National Sleep Foundation, they have a lot of useful information about sleep. There's so many books available as well on sleep that can give you somewhat of a sense of what to do. There's a lot of online programs. I think Stanford University has a really large online CBTI program too. So there's a ton out there.
Okay, that's
one of the things that I heard was that if you get outside between 8 and 10 a.m., that starts your sleep drive mechanism going, because or something. Does it do that? And then you're more likely to get better sleep that night. Is that true?
So that's, again, going to be one of those things that depends on the person, because it depends on their own natural circadian tendency. So if you are kind of more in what we would say the quote unquote normal category, where this is how most of our society is set up, where you're probably getting to sleep around 11 and waking up around 7, that window would be a good time for you to get outside and get some sunlight exposure. And that's going to help reset your clock. And if you're active, that's going to help build your sleep drive a bit more. But for someone who's, more oriented towards being a night person, or someone who's more of an early bird, that might affect them differently. So it really just depends on, what you're trying to do with your sleep and what your unique biology is, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. We talked about melatonin, but we didn't get to any of the prescription drugs or the more pharmaceuticals. What do you think of those? I've heard that they just zonk you out and they actually don't give you restful sleep, get you into the REM, that state that you say is so important. Is that true?
Yes. So the short answer is yes, that is true. And again, like I was saying before, if you have insomnia, the first line of treatment is to do the CBTI, the cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, because we know that these medications like the benzodiazepines or the Z drugs like Ambien and drugs of that nature, they have a lot of very long-term negative health consequences. And what we know, again, from the research is that when compared to placebo, like taking just a sugar pill, when they've done these double-blind randomized clinical control studies, trials, we found that these medications generally only give you an extra 15 minutes of sleep when compared to a placebo. So we think that it's giving us a lot more sleep than it actually is. And in fact, it's causing a lot of detrimental side effects as a result, especially as we age. It can cause a lot of problems for us if we continue to take these pills. So in general, I always recommend try CBTI first, especially if it's for insomnia. If it's for some other type of sleep disorder, that's something that you want to consult with your physician about and get, their recommendations. But for insomnia, please try the behavioral interventions first.
I'd love to talk about, you mentioning Ambien made me think of a story. I'd love to talk a bit about jet lag and some great solutions for that. When I was training and racing, and we were, mostly cycling in Europe and Australia, so always traveling in all these different time zones. And I had a couple teammates that, took Ambien. This is, a while back, quite a while back. So I don't know that they really were aware of potential negative side effects, but two of them that I was roommates with both experienced they would get up out of bed, walk around like crazy people saying crazy things that didn't make any sense, and was really scary for me. And, and you couldn't wake them up. And so yeah, it was awful. And I thought, gosh, it would be really frightening for people that live alone that have insomnia and they're on a drug like this. They could, walk out. I mean, we've all heard stories of people walking out in the middle of the night in their neighborhood naked, for people that really can't sleep, and especially with jet lag, it feels like it's the only solution because they're just desperate for any kind of sleep, anything, but they may not be getting what they think they are because they're walking around in the middle of the night naked outside or with their roommate. So I found, as hard as it is coming from the West Coast to Europe, that the trick was always, upon arrival, don't go to sleep, because you are desperate to go to sleep right around what ends up being Europe's like 3 or 4 p.m. You would do anything to just sleep. But if I can stay up till 9 Europe time, that is almost 100% enough and set you on a pattern, because you're so exhausted by then that's a great night's sleep. It can get a little iffy the 2 nights, but some tips, tricks, tactics for jet lag would be awesome.
You are exactly right about that advice. So that was perfect advice. So, it depends on what time zone you're traveling to, but again, if you're going from the West Coast to Europe, keeping yourself awake until a reasonable time, like let's say 9 o'clock, as you said, that would definitely help you to reset your rhythm and get you back on track on that time zone, versus allowing yourself to sleep right away, because that's just going to really continue to confuse your body. So this is a time where if you're super tired, go ahead and have that extra cup of coffee, because that's going to help you stay on track, and maybe try to get as much sunlight as possible, or as much light exposure, keep active, do something fun, so that you're able to stay kind of on that time zone. The opposite would be true if you're traveling the other way, where then, you have to go to sleep earlier. At that point, you would want to dim the lights as much as possible. That could be a time where you try to take melatonin. Again, you want to try to consult with your physician about that. But melatonin is definitely used for that type of jet lag as well. And so that could be a way to shift you to an earlier time zone if you need to. And again, try to keep things not as stimulating at that point. With shift work, sometimes taking prophylactic naps are a good idea, especially right before you start a night shift. And then that's a case where you might want to use melatonin in order to shift yourself to a night schedule. So again, it's really going to vary on the person and what the situation is, but in general, if you can keep your sleep schedule consistent somehow, that's going to be most beneficial to you. So often where I see the most problems is if someone has to rapidly change their shifts. So if they go from days to nights, nights to days, back and forth several times, that's really going to mess up your sleep. And so if you can at least give yourself 2 weeks of being on the same schedule, that can help keep things a bit more consistent.
Okay.
Got it.
How do you use CBTI, so cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, to help patients and people change their sleep habits? I don't think we've gone deep at all into really what it is, and do you first take a pretty lengthy kind of quiz or test to really to uncover what's actually happening? Tell us about just a lot more about CBTI and how our listeners might be able to find it and lean into it if they would desire.
Sure. So I would say there's that app that I was mentioning, but if you're having a pretty significant chronic problem, like if it's been lasting 3 months or more,
Right.
of at least 3 days a week of trouble sleeping, I really would suggest reaching out to a provider who specializes in cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, which is different than regular CBT, because regular CBT doesn't address some of the insomnia aspects that I was talking about. So you really want someone who knows what they're talking about when it comes to sleep. But in general, the way the process works is you're first going to do an initial evaluation with a provider who's going to be able to ask you some guided questions to help figure out what the problem actually is. Is this truly insomnia? Is it something else? Do you need to go get a sleep study? Are there other sleep disorders potentially present? But once we figure out, okay, this really is insomnia, like I was mentioning before, you want to keep track of your sleep throughout the duration of the treatment that you're going to do using a sleep diary. But especially the first week, you're going to see what your patterns are. And then from there, whoever you're working with is going to help you develop a sleep schedule that works best for your life and whatever is going on, and helps to build up the sleep drive that I was talking about, as well as keep your circadian rhythm regular. So a lot of it is about following this more stricter sleep schedule and looking at what behaviors are you engaging in, like the napping or the sleeping in or the staying up late at night and binge watching a show. How can we work on changing those behaviors, as well as minimizing any anxiety you might experience around sleep, because that's a huge factor for a lot of people that tends to keep them up, or if there are other stressors in their lives that are contributing to the problem. So for some people, the behaviors is one factor, but maybe there's been this major life event that they haven't done any work into trying to process. And, so we really want to take a look at that and try to get you to a different place, so that you're not feeling as stressed all the time, because stress is definitely going to impact your sleep as well. And so that's kind of in a nutshell what it looks like. And typically it's, for people who are not trying to get off of a sleep medication and aren't experiencing significant anxiety around sleep, usually within 8 to 10 weeks, you're going to see a pretty big improvement.
Okay. That's awesome. Super helpful.
Sure.
I have a couple of friends who say they're insomniacs, like that's who they are and it's not changeable. Is that true, or does something like CBTI, can it change even the person who's had bad sleep for decades?
Yes, so I have seen it change the people who have had bad sleep for decades many times. I mean, we sometimes, like you said, they kind of get fused with this identity of being an insomniac, but it doesn't have to be that way, and it takes a lot of kind of digging into, why do you think you are that way, and what could you be doing that's contributing to that problem, and do you really want to continue on with this lifestyle? Like, what's important to you? What do you value? How do you want to live your life? In order, to get the person to see, okay, well, this is something that's important to me, and this is something that I want to change. And once you have that commitment and you're ready, then yes, it can absolutely change if it's something that you want.
Great. Well, I'm going to let them know. I'm also going to let them know about your book, the book of sleep, 75 ways to relieve insomnia, because I think a lot of our audience are going to be interested in that. Is there anything you'd like to leave us with about sleep?
Yeah, I would just say, for those of you out there that are listening that are struggling with insomnia, know that it can definitely get better, and that it's understandable that you're feeling frustrated. But if you take some of the pressure off and just try to focus on other things, that can help you to achieve more balance, and that there definitely are strategies out there that will work for you.
Thank you.
There's
so
hope.
much.
There's hope for your
Yes,
sleep, people.
Exactly.
Gosh, thanks so much for this.
Oh, of course, it was my pleasure. I really appreciate being able to do this. I hope it was useful.
Very useful. And I know our audience will really appreciate it. So thank you so much.
All right. Thank you. Take care. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey, folks. Okay, back by very popular demand is our plant-powered plate fridge magnet, which you are going to receive for free if you leave us a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to this podcast on. So here are the details. Just write your quick review. Does not need to be long, does not need to be a whole story. Just be honest and speak from the heart. Then take a quick screenshot of the review you wrote and email it to us at podcast@switchforgood.org. That's podcast@switchforgood.org. And include your mailing address so we can send you a power plate. We are doing this because the more reviews we garner, the higher we go in search results, which means more folks will learn about our podcast. So the power is in your hands. Leave us a review, and zoom, your power plate arrives at your doorstep.
So thank you so much for tuning in today. If we helped you in any way, then click the subscribe button and let's keep hanging out together. We have so much more to share with you.
And if you need more information on actually making the switch for good, please visit us at switchforgood.org for loads of info. And you can subscribe to our mailing list where you will receive all sorts of super cool gifts, discount codes to our very fave dairy-free products, and a lifetime of powerful health tips.
So join us on the journey to switch for good. This is the future.